and welcome to Latropeth Language Tutorial 16, Time, Aspect and Mood. Let's look at expressing time in languages, verb tenses versus context as a way of expressing the time that an action took place. We're familiar in English with these tense forms. Mary leaves the house, present tense. Mary left the house, past tense. Below that, we have an example where context is really telling you what time it took place. There's no change in the verb form itself. I put the coffee on each day. I put the coffee on yesterday. Now, Latropeth has no tense forms as such. The context determines the time the action took place. There's actually lots of languages like this that don't have explicit tense forms. When making reference to the future, lassa is often incorporated into the verb form as an Arialis marker. Arialis means it's not necessarily reality. There's a sort of a hypothetical aspect to it. If something takes place in the future and you say, I will go to the river, it may not happen, it may happen. So it's, in a sense, hypothetical. Lassa tends to appear in lots of verbs where there's a hypothetical aspect to what you're saying. So let's first look at an example where the present has been referenced with the context. So in this sentence, it's only dasa baho tayam, today, that tells you this is actually the present. And so when you're translating it into English, you would translate it with the present tense. Okay, Pichenio yis dasa baho tayam nakum punim nasu. The man goes to the river today. Now let's look at a past example where I've substituted dasa baho tayam with kunim, yesterday. This you would translate into English as past tense, because you've got this time reference yesterday in the sentence. Pichenio yis kunim nakum punim nasu. Now we've got a future example, and we do have, as well as the time reference phrase yamadasa yefampaya in 3 days, referring to the future, you also do get lassa within the verb because because the future is in a way hypothetical. Okay. The man will go to the river in 3 days. So now let's move on to aspect. Aspect is a grammatical category that expresses how an action, event, or state denoted by a verb extends over time. This is the Wikipedia definition, which I think is quite good. So aspect's not quite the same thing as tense. Let's have a look at an example here. So this is perfect or perfective aspect, indicating completion. This is very widespread across the languages of the world. Anyone studying sort of European languages has probably come across what's known as the perfect. So in this example from English, you have I eat, the present, and I have eaten, the present perfect. So yes, I have eaten did happen in the past, but what you're emphasizing here is the fact that the action is completed. It's the completion or perfection of the action. So it's a perfect aspect. Continuous aspect, indicating action in progress. So you have an English example here too as well. I eat, present, and then I am eating, present continuous aspect. Action is ongoing. This is not very common in the languages of the world. Celtic languages have it, Spanish has it, English has it, but overall it's not very common in the languages of the world. So let's look at perfective aspect in Latropeth. So the perfective aspect suffix yama conveys completion of the action of the verb. Yama substitutes the general marker yis in perfective constructions. So this very common ending yis, you would substitute it with yama to form the perfect aspect in Latropeth. Okay, so let's have a look at an example. So I've got Pichenio yama nakum punim nasu. So goodness, I really get my money's worth out of this sentence, don't I? Variations of this sentence. This time we're saying the man has gone to the river. So this is actually perfect. So it's the fact that the action of going to the river is completed. Okay. Pichenio yama nakum punim nasu. Corrective. Sorry about the typo there. Now let's move on to mood. Mood relates to how grammar conveys what the speaker is using a language utterance for. So this is my own definition because the other definitions I looked up didn't quite emphasize what I wanted to emphasize. People say, what do you use language for? And people say, oh, communication, conveying information. It's actually a few different things when you think about it that you're using language for. And mood in grammar relates to this. So let's have a look. Uses of language. Conveying information, indicative, mood. Seeking information, interrogative, mood. So when you're asking questions, you're using language to get information. Issuing a command, imperative, mood. When you're issuing a command, you're using language to get someone to do something. You've got conveying hypotheticality. So you might be conveying information, or you might be conveying a possible situation. This is where subjunctive mood comes into play. Now, I'll illustrate the subjunctive here in German because English is a bit bereft in terms of subjunctive forms, and subjunctive, something you come across quite a lot in European languages, and there is a variation of subjunctive in Latropeth as well. So, remembering subjunctive relates to sort of hypothetical, possible, conditional situations, so it's not necessarily happening, it's more hypothetical than that. So let's have a look first at some German forms that are not subjunctive, okay? These are actually indicative. Er hat einen Hund, okay, he has a dog. And in each of these, I'm using the verb haben, which is to have in German. This is the infinitive at the top. So we've got present tense, er hat einen Hund, he has a dog. Below that is the past, er hatte einen Hund, he had a dog, okay? Now let's have a look at the subjunctive forms. Now German actually has two subjunctives. So subjunctive 2 is by far the most common. Now have a look at how the verb changes in this form. So wenn er einen Hund hätte. So this form hätte, this is a subjunctive 2 form. If he had a dog is a hypothetical situation, and this is why you use the subjunctive in this particular sentence, or it's half of a sentence. Down the bottom is subjunctive 1, which is much less common. This you often see in newspapers, and this is very interesting. Er sagt, dass er einen Hund habe. He says that he has a dog. The subjunctive 1 is used for reported speech. So it's conditional in the sense that you're conveying something that someone else has said, but it's hypothetical because it's not necessarily true, and you don't necessarily think it's true. So, but you're just passing on the message. You're just the messenger. So it's interesting in English in a newspaper article, you can have things like, he claimed that blah blah blah. He further maintained blah 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 blah. And then in German, you don't have to make as much effort because you've got this subjunctive 1 form, where the actual verb form is saying, I'm passing on what this person's saying, but I don't necessarily believe it. Okay, so now, let's look at the subjunctive in Latropeth. So formed with Arialis, subjunctive interfix lassa, appearing in the verb form before the verb root. Okay, so this is a slide from the last video that I did with a conditional subordinate clause in Latropeth, and this Arialis or subjunctive marker, I often call it Arialis in the grammar, subjunctive. I'm referring to this sort of hypothetical situation. Got it in red here, okay? And this is a conditional situation, and this is why you get lassa in here. So, naya tawo yis pewa kawe no yim niwa ele, na lassa yos yis pewa osu, okay? So if the deer drinks the bad water, it would be on well. It's hypothetical because it's conditional. So now we'll go back to an earlier slide, or I'll reference an earlier slide in this same video where I talked about the future reference also often incorporating lassa, okay? So lassa is not a future marker, but it's often used in sentences referencing the future because the future is hypothetical in the sense that it may or may not happen. Okay, so piche lassa niyo yis yemadasa yefampayanakum niyapunim nasu. Okay, this is the same sentence that I showed you in an earlier slide in this video. I'm emphasizing here the use of lassa as a subjunctive or Arialis marker. Okay, piche lassa niyo yis yemadasa yefampayanakum niyapunim nasu. The man will go to the river in 3 days. Yes, but it might not happen. Okay, so let's now look at the reverent mood in Latropeth. So the reverent mood implies mindful obedience in an official context or deference, submission in a religious context. So I call this function in Latropeth the reverent mood. It's formed by suffixing kaya after the verb root, substituting in the position of yis or yama. This is used only in the first or third person. You may remember the same structure is used for commands, imperatives, okay, but for forming commands. But commands are in the second person. When you're issuing a command, you're talking to someone or to some people. When this structure is used in the first or the third person, it signals these aforementioned functions, okay? So let's just look at an example, okay, of the reverent mood in use. So Pifa Pawis Kayayika Mun Paku, okay, so the tribal spirit chief praises the sun god. So instead of Pifa Pawis Yis, we've got Pifa Pawis Kaya. So this is an example of, it's basically because this is deference or submission to a higher power. The sun god's the big, the main god, if you remember from the creation myth, Paku. So therefore, we're using the reverent mood here. Pifa Pawis Kaya Yikamun Paku. Thank you for watching.